The woman stumbled through the swirling snow, her thin traveling dress soaked through to her skin, and collapsed against the wooden post of the Wells Fargo station, just as the last light bled from the December sky over Silver Peak, Nevada, in 1882. Her tears had frozen on her cheeks during the bitter walk from the stagecoach depot, and now fresh ones burned hot trails down her face as she clutched a crumpled letter in her trembling fingers. The advertisement had promised a kind husband, a warm home, and a fresh start out west, but the reality waiting for her had been a cruel joke that left her alone and desperate in a snowstorm she never imagined could exist in Nevada. Preston Yates was closing up his ranch for the night when he saw the figure collapse near the edge of his property line. The snow had started falling that afternoon, one of those rare winter storms that swept through the high desert valleys and transformed the sagebrush landscape into something unrecognizable. He had been a cowboy his entire 28 years, working cattle across 3 states before finally settling on his own modest spread just outside Silver Peak, and he knew better than most how dangerous this weather could be for someone unprepared. He urged his horse forward, his breath creating white clouds in the frigid air as he approached what he now realized was a woman in considerable distress. "Madam," he called out, dismounting quickly and approaching carefully so as not to startle her. "Madam, you cannot stay out here. You will freeze." Amelia Zimmerman looked up through her tears at the tall figure materializing through the snow. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered so violently that words would not form. All she could do was shake her head helplessly, clutching that damned letter tighter as if it might somehow change the words written there. She had traveled all the way from Philadelphia, leaving behind everything she knew, selling her mother's jewelry to afford the train fare and the stagecoach passage, only to discover that the man who had promised to marry her had died 3 weeks ago. His brother, who had been handling his affairs, had met her at the station long enough to inform her there would be no wedding, no home, and no reason for her to remain in Silver Peak. Then he had left her standing there with her single trunk and nowhere to go. Preston saw the state she was in and made a quick decision. "Come on now, let me help you up. My ranch is just through those trees. We can get you warm and figure out what happened after that." He reached down and gently took her arm, helping her to her feet. She swayed against him, her body shaking violently from the cold, and he realized she might not make it even the short distance to his house if he did not act fast. Without asking permission, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his horse, settling her in the saddle before climbing up behind her and wrapping his heavy coat around both of them. The ride to his ranch house took only minutes, but it felt like hours to Amelia. She was aware of the solid warmth of the stranger behind her, of the horse moving steadily through the deepening snow, of the way the man held the reins with one hand while keeping his other arm securely around her waist so she would not fall. She should have been frightened, should have protested being carried off by a man she did not know, but she was too cold and too defeated to care. If he meant her harm, so be it. At least it would be an end to the misery of this terrible day. Preston kicked open the door to his cabin and carried her inside, where the fire he had banked that morning still glowed with life. He set her down in the chair closest to the hearth and immediately began building up the flames, adding logs and stirring the embers until heat began to radiate through the small space. Then he turned his attention back to her, taking in her pale face, her blue-tinged lips, and the way she still clutched that letter like it was the only solid thing in her world. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I will turn my back and you can wrap yourself in this blanket. There are dry things in the trunk by the bed that might fit you. They belong to my mother." Amelia nodded numbly, and Preston was true to his word, turning to face the wall while she struggled with frozen fingers to unfasten the buttons of her dress. Everything was wet, from her outer garments down to her underclothes and stockings, and it took her long minutes to peel the fabric away from her icy skin. She wrapped the thick wool blanket around herself, and then looked in the trunk he had indicated, finding a simple cotton nightgown and a woman's dressing robe that smelled faintly of lavender. With clumsy movements, she managed to pull them on under the blanket, and only then did she speak. "You can turn around now," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. Preston turned and saw her sitting there wrapped in his mother's old robe, looking like a lost child despite the fact that she was clearly a grown woman. He judged her to be in her early 20s, with dark hair that hung in wet tangles around her shoulders and brown eyes that were red from weeping. He pulled another chair close to the fire and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Now then," he said quietly, "do you want to tell me what has you out in a snowstorm crying your heart out?" The kindness in his voice was Amelia's undoing. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a rush. She told him about the advertisement in the Philadelphia newspaper, about the letters she had exchanged with Thomas Barrett, a mine supervisor who had written such beautiful things about building a life together in Nevada. She explained how her parents had died the previous year, leaving her alone with no means of support except a small inheritance that would not last long. She described the decision to become a mail-order bride, the long journey west, and the crushing blow of discovering that Thomas had been killed in a mining accident and his brother wanted nothing to do with her. "He just left me there," she said, her voice breaking. "He said I should get back on the stagecoach and return to wherever I came from. But I spent every penny I had getting here. I have nothing to go back to and no way to get there even if I did. I started walking because I did not know what else to do, and then the snow got so heavy I could not see, and I thought perhaps it would be better to just lie down and let it cover me." "No," Preston said firmly, and the word came out with such force that Amelia looked up at him in surprise. "No more tears, only joy. You hear me? You are alive, you are warm, and you are safe. That is 3 things better than you were an hour ago, and we will work on making tomorrow better still." Amelia stared at him, this stranger who had plucked her from the snow and carried her to safety. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Preston said simply, "and because I know what it is like to be alone in the world. When my parents died 5 years ago from fever, I had my siblings to look after and no one to turn to for help. We managed, but there were days when I wondered if we would make it. Someone gave me a hand up when I needed it most, and I guess I am just paying that forward." "You have siblings?" Amelia asked, latching onto this piece of information as if it might anchor her to something solid. "Had," Preston corrected gently. "My brother headed to California 2 years back to try his hand at farming. My sister married a good man and moved to Oregon. They write when they can, but mostly it is just me now, running this ranch and trying to make a go of it." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the cabin. Amelia felt warmth slowly returning to her body, though her heart still ached with the weight of her situation. "I do not know what I am going to do," she admitted quietly. "I have nowhere to go and no money to my name except a few coins. My trunk is still at the stagecoach station, assuming no one has stolen it by now." "We will fetch your trunk tomorrow when the snow clears," Preston assured her. "As for the rest, well, you can stay here for now. I have the space, and it would not be right to turn you out into the cold. We will figure out a plan once you have had time to rest and think clearly." Amelia wanted to protest, wanted to say that she could not possibly impose on his hospitality, but the truth was she had no other choice. She nodded gratefully, fresh tears threatening to fall, but she blinked them back. "No more tears," he had said, "only joy." It seemed an impossible request given her circumstances, but something about the way he had said it made her want to try. Preston stood and moved to the small kitchen area of his cabin. "When did you last eat?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the hollow look in her eyes. "This morning on the stagecoach," Amelia replied, "but I do not think I can eat anything right now." "You need to try," he said, pulling out a pot and filling it with water from the bucket by the door. "I will make some broth. It will be easy on your stomach and help warm you from the inside." While he worked, Amelia watched him move around the cabin with practiced ease. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. His hands were calloused and scarred from years of ranch work, but they moved with surprising gentleness as he prepared the simple meal. She realized she knew nothing about this man except that he had saved her life, and she found herself curious about him in a way that surprised her. "How long have you been ranching here?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the numbness that was slowly giving way to tingling pain as her frozen extremities thawed. 3 years, Preston replied, stirring the pot as it began to heat. "I worked as a ranch hand for 10 years before that, saving every penny I could until I had enough to buy this land and some starter cattle. It is not much yet, but it is mine, and I am building it into something that will last." There was pride in his voice, and Amelia could not help but admire his determination. "That must have taken a lot of hard work," she observed. "The hardest kind," he agreed, "but the kind that means something. Out here, a man is measured by what he builds and how he treats others, not by who his family was or how much money he inherited. I like that. It means I have a fair shot at making something of myself." He brought her a bowl of the simple broth and a piece of bread that he toasted over the fire. Amelia took it gratefully and found that once she started eating, her appetite returned with a vengeance. She had not realized how hungry she was, how depleted both physically and emotionally. Preston watched her eat with satisfaction, then made himself a bowl and sat down across from her again. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said after a while. "What was your life like there?" Amelia considered the question, thinking back to the life that now seemed like it belonged to someone else. "Quiet," she said finally. "My father was a clerk and my mother took in sewing. We lived in a small house near the center of the city. After they died, I tried to continue my mother's sewing business, but I did not have her skill or her connections. The money ran out faster than I expected, and I realized I needed to make a change. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, it seemed like an answer to prayer. A chance to start fresh somewhere new, to build a life with someone who wanted the same things I did." "And what things are those?" Preston asked, genuinely curious. "A home," Amelia said simply. "Family. A place to belong. I know that must sound foolish to someone who has all those things." "I do not have a family anymore," Preston reminded her gently. "And a house is not the same as a home. I understand wanting those things. They are good things to want." They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily between them, despite the strangeness of their situation. Preston told her about life on the ranch, about the challenges of running cattle in the harsh Nevada climate, about his hopes to expand his herd and maybe bring in some horses to breed and train. Amelia found herself relaxing in his presence, the terror and despair of the day slowly receding under the influence of his calm, steady demeanor. Finally, Preston stood and gestured to the bed in the corner of the cabin. "You should sleep. Take the bed. I will make myself comfortable by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Amelia protested. "You have already done so much." "You are a guest and you have been through an ordeal," Preston said firmly. "I will not hear any arguments. Besides, I have slept in far less comfortable places than this floor. I will be fine." Too exhausted to argue further, Amelia made her way to the bed and climbed under the heavy quilts. The mattress was stuffed with corn husks and smelled faintly of the outdoors, but it was warm and dry, and within minutes she felt herself drifting toward sleep. The last thing she was aware of was Preston banking the fire and settling down with a blanket near the hearth, and the surprising feeling that despite everything, she was safe. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the snow having stopped during the night. Amelia woke to find Preston already up and moving about the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. She sat up slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, and then the events of the previous day came rushing back. "Good morning," Preston said, turning to smile at her. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Amelia admitted, surprised to find it was true. Her body ached and her eyes felt gritty from crying, but the bone-deep cold was gone, and with it some of the despair that had threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you for everything you did last night." "No need for thanks," Preston said, pouring her a cup of coffee and bringing it to her. "I am going to head into town this morning to fetch your trunk and take care of some business. You should stay here where it is warm and rest. There is food in the larder if you get hungry, and plenty of wood for the fire." Amelia wanted to protest that she should go with him, but she also recognized that she was in no condition for another trip through the cold. She nodded her agreement and watched as Preston pulled on his heavy coat and hat, preparing to head out into the winter morning. "Preston," she called as he reached the door. He turned back to look at her. "Thank you, really. You saved my life." He tipped his hat to her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just doing what any decent person would do. I will be back before dark." After he left, Amelia got up and explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was a simple structure, one large room with a sleeping area, a small kitchen space, and a sitting area near the fireplace. Everything was neat and well maintained, showing the care of someone who took pride in his possessions even when no one was watching. She found herself touching things gently, learning about Preston through his belongings. There were books on a shelf, mostly practical volumes about animal husbandry and land management, but also a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that surprised her. A photograph in a simple frame showed a younger Preston with a man and woman who must have been his parents, and two other children who would be his siblings. They all looked happy, frozen in that moment before fever had stolen two of them away. Amelia spent the day tidying the cabin, grateful to have something useful to do. She found flour and made biscuits, started a stew with vegetables from the root cellar and salt pork from the larder, and generally tried to make herself helpful. It was the least she could do to repay Preston's kindness, and it felt good to be doing something productive instead of simply wallowing in her misfortune. Preston returned in the late afternoon, hauling her trunk on a small sledge behind his horse. His face was serious as he brought it inside and set it down near the fire. "I spoke with Henry Barrett in town," he said without preamble. "Thomas's brother. He confirmed what you told me about his brother's death and his decision not to honor the marriage arrangement. I told him that was a cowardly way to treat a lady who had traveled so far in good faith." "What did he say?" Amelia asked, her heart sinking at the thought of Preston fighting her battles for her. "He said it was not his responsibility to take on his dead brother's promises," Preston replied, his jaw tight with anger. He said Thomas should not have been making arrangements for a wife in the first place, since he could barely take care of himself. Then he said some other things that I will not repeat in front of a lady. Amelia felt tears threatening again and blinked them back stubbornly. I suppose he is right that it is not his responsibility. I should not have expected anything else. He is not right, Preston said firmly. A man's words should mean something, and if Thomas made you promises, then his family should honor them even after his death. But Henry Barrett is a hard man who only cares about money, and apparently Thomas owed him a considerable sum. He sees you as just another creditor he has no intention of paying. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Preston seemed to come to a decision. I have been thinking about your situation, he said carefully. You need a place to stay and a way to support yourself. I need help running this ranch. It is too much for one person, and I have been struggling to keep up with all the work. What if you stayed on here as my housekeeper? I could pay you a small wage and you would have room and board. It would give you time to figure out what you want to do next. Amelia stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would do that? Let me stay here and work for you. It would be a fair arrangement, Preston said. I am not offering it out of charity. I genuinely need the help and you clearly need a place to be. The only thing is, people in town will talk. A single woman living with a single man, even as a housekeeper, will cause gossip. I want you to be prepared for that. I can handle gossip, Amelia said quietly. I cannot handle freezing to death or starving in the street. If you are serious about this offer, then I accept it gratefully. Preston nodded, looking relieved. Good. Then it is settled. I will show you around the ranch tomorrow and we can work out a routine that suits us both. That night, they shared the meal Amelia had prepared, and Preston's compliments on her cooking were sincere and generous. They talked more easily than they had the night before, the arrangement between them providing a structure that made things less awkward. Amelia found herself watching Preston when he was not looking, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, the thoughtful way he considered his words before speaking. He was nothing like Thomas Barrett had sounded in his letters, nothing like any man she had known in Philadelphia, and she found herself drawn to him in a way that both surprised and unsettled her. Over the following weeks, Amelia settled into life on the ranch. She woke early each morning to prepare breakfast, pack lunch for Preston to take out to the range, and tackle the endless domestic tasks that came with running a household. She mended his clothes, organized his supplies, and turned the cabin into a true home with small touches that made Preston smile. He, in turn, showed her how to care for the chickens he kept for eggs, taught her to milk the cow, and patiently explained the workings of the ranch whenever she asked questions. The winter deepened around them, and Silver Peak lived up to its name as snow capped the surrounding mountains and dusted the high desert valley. Preston spent his days checking on cattle, breaking ice on water sources, and hauling hay to the feeding areas. The work was brutal in the cold, and he often came home exhausted, his face chapped from the wind and his hands aching from the cold. Amelia would have hot water ready for him to wash, warm food on the table, and a fire that turned the cabin into a refuge against the harsh world outside. They developed a comfortable rhythm, and Amelia found herself happier than she had been in years. The work was hard, but it was satisfying, and she had a purpose that had been missing from her life in Philadelphia. More than that, she had Preston's company, and she discovered that he was one of the kindest, most honorable men she had ever met. He never once made her feel uncomfortable or took advantage of their living situation. He was unfailingly respectful, treating her like a valued partner rather than a servant, and often asking her opinion on ranch matters as if her thoughts truly mattered to him. One evening in late January, a fierce blizzard swept through the valley, howling around the cabin and piling snow against the doors and windows. Preston came in from checking on the animals looking more worried than Amelia had seen him since that first night. "It is bad out there," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "Worst storm I have seen in 5 years. We need to make sure we have everything we need because we will not be going anywhere for a few days." They spent that evening preparing, bringing in extra wood, checking their food supplies, and making sure they had water stored in case the pump froze. As the storm raged outside, they sat by the fire playing cards with a worn deck Preston produced from a drawer, and Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in months at his terrible poker face and her own surprising competitive streak. "You are hustling me," Preston accused with mock indignation after she won the 5th hand in a row. "You probably played cards professionally in Philadelphia, and you have been hiding it from me." "You caught me," Amelia said, her eyes sparkling with mirth. "I ran an underground gambling den out of my mother's sewing room. The local constable was very disappointed when I left town." Preston laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made Amelia's heart skip in a way she tried not to examine too closely. "I knew there was something suspicious about you. No one makes biscuits that good and beats me at cards without having a shady past." They stayed up late into the night, talking and laughing while the storm raged outside. At some point, the conversation turned more serious, and Preston found himself telling Amelia things he had never shared with anyone. He told her about the guilt he felt over his parents' deaths, how he sometimes wondered if he could have done more to save them. He talked about the loneliness of the past few years, running the ranch alone and wondering if he would spend his whole life working the land with no one to share it with. "I thought about advertising for a wife myself," he admitted quietly, "but it seemed dishonest somehow. What woman would want to take on this hard life when there are easier options back east? And how could I promise someone a good life when I am still barely scraping by most years?" Amelia felt her heart clench at his words. "You should not sell yourself short," she said gently. "You have built something real here, something that matters. Any woman would be lucky to share this life with you." Preston looked at her across the firelight, and something shifted in his expression. "And what about you, Amelia? Would you consider yourself lucky or cursed to be stuck here on this ranch?" "Lucky," Amelia said without hesitation. "I know I came here under terrible circumstances, and I know this was not the life I planned, but I cannot regret it. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, treated me with respect and kindness when you could have taken advantage, and made me feel valued in a way I never have before. I am grateful for every day I get to be here." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feeling, and for a moment, Amelia thought Preston might say something more. But then he cleared his throat and stood up, breaking the spell. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Morning comes early even in a blizzard." The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them inside the cabin with only brief ventures out to care for the animals. The forced proximity might have been awkward, but instead it felt natural, as if they had been living this way for years instead of weeks. They cooked together, worked together on indoor tasks like mending tack and organizing supplies, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. On the 3rd night, as the storm finally began to break, Preston built up the fire and pulled out the volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. "My mother used to read these aloud," he said almost shyly. "She loved poetry even though she married a rancher and lived a hard life. She said beauty was important even in tough times." "Would you read some?" Amelia asked, touched by this glimpse into his past. Preston opened the book and began to read, his voice giving life to the ancient words of love and longing. Amelia listened with her eyes closed, feeling the weight of emotion in every line, and when he finished, she found tears on her cheeks. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you for sharing it with me." When she opened her eyes, she found Preston looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "No more tears, remember," he said softly, echoing his words from that first night. "Only joy." "These are tears of joy," Amelia replied, her voice barely audible, "or something like it." Preston's hand lingered on her face, and then he seemed to realize what he was doing and pulled back. "I should not have," he started, but Amelia interrupted him. "You should have," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Preston, these past weeks, I have felt something growing between us. Please tell me I am not imagining it." Preston looked torn, his internal struggle visible on his face. "You are not imagining it," he admitted. "But Amelia, you came here expecting to marry Thomas Barrett. You had your life all planned out and then it fell apart. I do not want to be something you settle for because you have no other choice. You deserve better than that." "You think I would settle for you?" Amelia asked incredulously. "Preston, you are the best man I have ever known. If I have feelings for you, it is not because I have no other options. It is because of who you are, how you make me feel, the life we have been building together. I think I started falling for you that first night when you carried me in from the snow and told me it would be all right. Every day since has only made those feelings stronger." Preston stood abruptly and paced to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. "I am falling for you too," he said, his back still to her. "I have been fighting it because I did not want to take advantage of your situation. But Amelia, I think about you all day when I am out working. I look forward to coming home because I know you will be here. I have started imagining a future where this is not just a temporary arrangement, where you stay not as my housekeeper, but as something more." Amelia rose and crossed to him, placing her hand on his back. "Then stop fighting it," she said quietly. "I am here because I want to be, and I am staying because there is nowhere else I would rather be." Preston turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made Amelia's knees weak. "If we do this, if we let ourselves feel what we are feeling, there is no going back," he said. "I am not a man who loves lightly. If I give you my heart, it is yours for keeps." "Then give it to me," Amelia said, "because mine is already yours." Preston pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a desperate tenderness that spoke of weeks of restrained longing. Amelia melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "I have wanted to do that for so long," Preston admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "Then why did you wait?" Amelia teased, her heart soaring with happiness. "Because I am an idiot," Preston said with a laugh. "But a reformed idiot. I am not waiting anymore." The storm cleared the next day, revealing a landscape transformed by snow. Preston and Amelia worked together to dig out paths to the barn and check on all the animals. They found that 2 calves had been born during the blizzard, healthy despite the cold, and Amelia delighted in seeing the wobbly-legged babies nurse from their mothers. "Spring will bring more calves," Preston told her, his arm around her waist as they watched the herd. "It is the best time of year on a ranch, all that new life and promise." "I cannot wait to see it," Amelia said, leaning into his warmth. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the cozy cabin, Preston broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "Amelia, I want to do this right. I know we have not been courting in the traditional sense and everything about our situation is unusual, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I want to marry you, but only when you are ready. There is no rush. We can take all the time you need to be sure." Amelia turned from the stove and cupped his face in her hands. "I am sure," she said simply. "I came to Nevada to marry a man I had never met based on nothing but letters and hope. Now I am here with a man I know, who I have lived with and worked beside, who I have seen in good moments and hard ones. I am more sure of you than I ever was of Thomas Barrett. If you want to marry me, Preston Yates, then my answer is yes." Preston swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "Then we will go into town as soon as the roads are clear and talk to the preacher. I am not waiting one day longer than necessary to make you my wife." The journey to town took place 2 days later, the snow having melted enough to make the roads passable. They rode together on Preston's horse, Amelia seated in front of him with his arms around her, feeling safer and happier than she had ever thought possible. Silver Peak was a small town, just a main street with a handful of businesses and homes scattered around the edges, but it was bustling with activity after the storm. Preston took her first to the general store, where he introduced her to the proprietor, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Hoffman. "I would like to buy fabric for a dress," Preston told Mrs. Hoffman. "Something special. Amelia and I are getting married." Mrs. Hoffman's face lit up with delight, and she immediately began pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves. "Oh, how wonderful! We do not get many weddings in the winter. Let me see. I have a lovely blue wool that would bring out your eyes, my dear, and some cream-colored silk that just came in on the last shipment." Amelia protested that she did not need anything fancy, that a simple dress would do, but Preston insisted. "You deserve something beautiful," he said firmly. "Pick whatever you like and do not look at the prices." In the end, Amelia chose a rich blue fabric with a subtle pattern woven into it, and Mrs. Hoffman threw in some cream-colored lace for trim. "I will make the dress myself," Amelia told Preston as they left the store with their parcels. "I may not have my mother's skill, but I can manage a simple wedding dress." Their next stop was the church, a small whitewashed building at the end of the main street. Reverend Thomas Whitmore was a middle-aged man with a warm smile and gentle manner. He listened to their story with interest, and Amelia was grateful that Preston glossed over the details of her arrival in Silver Peak, simply saying that circumstances had brought them together, and they had discovered they were well suited. "I would be honored to perform the ceremony," Reverend Whitmore said. "Shall we say 2 weeks from Sunday? That will give you time to prepare and spread the word. A wedding is always a cause for celebration, especially in the dead of winter." As they were leaving the church, they encountered Henry Barrett coming out of the saloon across the street. He saw them together and his expression darkened. He crossed over to where they stood, his steps only slightly unsteady from drink. "Well, well," he said, his tone mocking. "If it is not the jilted bride and her rescuer, what brings you two to town looking so cozy?" "That is none of your concern," Preston said evenly, moving slightly in front of Amelia in a protective gesture. "I heard you took her in," Henry continued, ignoring Preston's warning tone. "Playing the knight in shining armor, are you? Or maybe you just saw an opportunity to get yourself a woman without having to court one properly." Preston's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Amelia stepped forward. "Your brother made me promises," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the anger burning in her chest. "He asked me to come here and build a life with him. I am sorry he died, truly I am, but that does not give you the right to mock what happened or to insult Preston. He is a better man than you will ever be, and I am grateful every day that things turned out the way they did. I would rather be with him than with 10 Thomas Barretts." Henry's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, and Amelia could see that her words had struck home. "You will regret throwing my brother's memory in my face," he said darkly. "That is enough," Preston said, his voice hard. "You said your piece when you left Amelia stranded at the stage-coach station. You do not get to harass her now. Stay away from her, Henry, or you and I are going to have a problem." Henry looked like he wanted to say more, but something in Preston's stance made him think better of it. He spat on the ground near their feet and stalked away, leaving them standing in the street with curious onlookers staring. "I am sorry," Amelia said quietly as they walked back to where they had left Preston's horse. "I should not have confronted him like that. I just made things worse." "You did not make anything worse," Preston assured her. "Henry Barrett is a bully and a coward, and someone needed to stand up to him. I am proud of you for speaking your mind, but I do not like the way he looked at you. We need to be careful." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them thinking about the encounter. But as they neared home, Preston squeezed Amelia's hand. "Do not let him ruin this day. We are getting married in 2 weeks, and that is all that matters." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Amelia worked on her dress in every spare moment, stitching carefully by lamplight in the evenings while Preston read aloud from his mother's book of poetry. She also began preparing for a wedding celebration, though it would be a small affair with only a few of Preston's neighboring ranchers and their families attending. Preston, meanwhile, threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy. He wanted to make sure everything was in order before the wedding, that there would be no pressing emergencies to interrupt their first days as husband and wife. He also made a special trip to the bank in Silver Peak and returned with a small velvet box that he hid carefully in his saddlebag. 3 days before the wedding, they received an unexpected visitor. Amelia was hanging laundry when she saw a wagon approaching the ranch, driven by an older couple she did not recognize. Preston came out of the barn when he heard the wagon, and his face broke into a surprised smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Winters," he called out, striding forward to help the woman down from the wagon seat. "What brings you all the way out here? We heard in town that you were getting married," Mrs. Winters said, her round face beaming. "Since your mother is not here to help, I thought perhaps your bride might appreciate some feminine assistance and advice." Amelia felt tears sting her eyes at the unexpected kindness. Mrs. Winters was a stranger, yet she had driven all the way out to the ranch just to offer help and support. The older woman took one look at Amelia's face and pulled her into a warm embrace. "There now, dear, no need for tears. My John and I were friends with Preston's parents, God rest them, and we have known this young man since he was in short pants. We want to make sure he treats you right and that you have everything you need for your wedding." Mr. Winters, a taciturn man with weathered features, shook Preston's hand firmly. "Congratulations, son. Your father would have been proud to see you settling down." They spent a lovely afternoon together, with Mrs. Winters examining Amelia's wedding dress and offering suggestions to improve it, while the men talked ranch business. Before they left, Mrs. Winters pressed a small package into Amelia's hands. "This was my mother's," she said. "Something old for your wedding day. It is a handkerchief with lace edging. I carried it when I married my John 40 years ago." Amelia was overwhelmed by the generosity and opened the package to find a beautiful, delicate handkerchief with intricate lacework. "I cannot accept this," she protested. "It is too precious." "Of course you can," Mrs. Winters said firmly. "You are starting a new life with a good man, and you deserve to have something special to mark the occasion. Besides, it will give me an excuse to come visit and see how you are settling in." After the Winters left, Amelia held the handkerchief carefully, marveling at the unexpected kindness of these people who barely knew her. "They are wonderful," she told Preston. "You are lucky to have neighbors like that." "We are lucky," Preston corrected, pulling her close. "They are your neighbors now, too, and your friends if you want them." The night before the wedding, Preston insisted on sleeping in the barn. "It is bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony," he said, despite Amelia's protests that this was silly superstition. "We have been living together for weeks," she pointed out. "I think we have already broken most of the traditional rules." "All the more reason to follow this one," Preston said with a grin. "Besides, I want tomorrow to feel special, like a new beginning. Humor me." So Amelia spent her last night as a single woman alone in the cabin, working on the final touches to her dress, and thinking about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been living in Philadelphia with her parents, with no thought of the West or marriage or any of this. 6 months ago, she had been alone and grieving, desperately seeking a way forward. 2 months ago, she had been on a train heading into the unknown, full of hope and fear in equal measure. And now, she was here, in a small cabin in Nevada, about to marry a man she had not known existed 2 months ago but who had become the center of her world. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with bright sunshine turning the snow-covered landscape into a sparkling wonderland. Amelia dressed carefully in her blue wool gown, which fit her perfectly after all her careful stitching. She arranged her dark hair in a simple style, weaving some ribbon misses Winters had given her through the curls, and pinned Mrs. Winters' handkerchief to her bodice as her something old. Preston arrived from the barn looking freshly shaved and nervous, wearing his best suit and holding a small bouquet of dried flowers he had somehow procured. "You look beautiful," he breathed when he saw her, and the look in his eyes made Amelia feel like the most cherished woman in the world. They rode to town together, and Amelia was surprised to see that quite a few people had gathered at the church, despite the cold and the short notice. The Winters were there, along with several other ranching families Preston knew. Mrs. Hoffman from the general store sat in the front row, beaming at them. Even Reverend Whitmore's wife had brought flowers to decorate the simple altar. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Preston's hand shook slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto Amelia's finger, but his voice was strong and sure as he spoke his vows. Amelia felt tears threatening as she promised to love, honor, and cherish this good man who had given her so much. And when Reverend Whitmore pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was tender and full of promise. The small reception was held in the church hall, with the ladies of the town providing food and drink. It was a modest celebration by Philadelphia standards, but to Amelia, it felt perfect. These people, most of whom she had never met before, had come out in the cold to celebrate with them, to welcome her into their community and wish them well. She found herself laughing and talking with the other ranch wives, who offered advice on everything from cooking at high altitude to treating frostbite to dealing with stubborn husbands. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Preston pulled Amelia aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Yates?" he asked, and Amelia's heart soared at the sound of her new name. "More than ready," she replied, and they said their goodbyes to the well-wishers before heading back to the ranch. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought about the significance of what had just happened. When they reached the cabin, Preston surprised Amelia by sweeping her up in his arms and carrying her over the threshold. "I have wanted to do that since the first night I brought you here," he admitted with a grin, "but the circumstances were not quite right." Amelia laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. "The circumstances are perfect now," she said, and kissed him soundly. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and amazed. Preston was gentle and patient, and Amelia felt safe and cherished in his arms. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want to build this ranch into something that will last for generations," Preston said, stroking Amelia's hair. "I want to have children who will grow up knowing this land and loving it the way I do. I want to build you a bigger house, with a real kitchen and separate rooms for our family. I want to give you everything I promised in those letters I never wrote." Amelia propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him. "You have already given me everything I need," she said seriously. "A home, a purpose, respect, love. Everything else is just extra. As long as we are together, I will be happy in this cabin or a mansion or a tent under the stars." Preston pulled her down for another kiss. "I love you, Amelia Yates. I did not know it was possible to feel this way about another person." "I love you too," Amelia whispered. "Thank you for saving me that night in the snow. Thank you for seeing past my circumstances to the person I could be. Thank you for choosing me." "I will choose you every day for the rest of my life," Preston promised, and Amelia knew he meant it. The winter slowly gave way to early spring, and Amelia discovered that life as a rancher's wife was both harder and more rewarding than she had imagined. The work was constant and physically demanding, but she found satisfaction in mastering new skills and contributing to the success of the ranch. Preston was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, and he never made her feel inadequate when she struggled with a new task. In March, the calving season began in earnest, and Amelia found herself helping Preston deliver baby calves at all hours of the day and night. It was messy, exhausting work, but the first time she helped a calf into the world and watched it struggle to its feet and nurse from its mother, she understood why Preston loved this life. There was something profound about being so intimately connected to the rhythms of nature, about nurturing life and watching it grow. One evening in late March, Amelia was feeling unusually tired and queasy. She had attributed it to the long hours and physical demands of calving season, but when the feeling persisted for several days, a different possibility began to occur to her. She counted back the weeks since the wedding and felt a thrill of excitement and fear. It was too early to be certain, but her body felt different in a way she could not quite explain. She decided to wait to say anything to Preston until she was sure, not wanting to get his hopes up prematurely. But Preston knew her too well by now and noticed something was different. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked one morning when she turned away from her breakfast looking green. "You have been off your feed for days now." "I am fine," Amelia assured him, but she could not quite meet his eyes. Preston studied her face for a long moment, and then understanding dawned. "Amelia, are you? Could you be?" "I think so," Amelia admitted, finally looking up at him. "It is too early to be certain, but yes, I think I might be expecting." The joy that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He let out a whoop of delight and picked her up, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to stop. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Possibly," Amelia cautioned, but she was grinning too. "We should not get too excited yet." It is early days. But Preston was beyond caution. He spent the rest of the day treating Amelia like she was made of spun glass, insisting she rest and refusing to let her do any heavy work. Amelia found it both annoying and endearing, and by evening she had to put her foot down. "Preston Yates, I am not an invalid. If I am indeed expecting, it will be months before I need to curtail my activities. You cannot keep me wrapped in cotton wool for the entire time." "I just want to take care of you," Preston said, looking chastened. "Both of you." "And you will," Amelia said gently. But the best way to take care of us is to let me continue living my life normally and helping with the ranch work I have come to love. I promise I will tell you if I need to slow down." As spring advanced and the weather warmed, Amelia's pregnancy became more certain. Her monthly courses did not come, her breasts became tender and swollen, and the morning sickness that had started in March continued into April. Mrs. Winters came to visit and confirmed what Amelia already knew, offering advice and reassurance based on her own experiences bearing 5 children. "It gets easier after the first few months," she promised. "The sickness will pass, and you will feel better than ever. There is something about carrying new life that makes a woman bloom." True to her word, by May, Amelia's morning sickness had faded, and she felt a surge of energy and well-being. Her body began to change in obvious ways, her belly rounding and her clothes growing tight. Preston was fascinated by every development, often placing his hand on her stomach and marveling at the life growing there. "I cannot believe we made this," he would say, his voice full of wonder. "A whole new person who is part of both of us." In June, Amelia felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings inside her belly. She grabbed Preston's hand and placed it where she had felt the movement, and they waited breathlessly until it happened again. The look on Preston's face when he felt his child move for the first time was something Amelia knew she would remember for the rest of her life. As summer advanced and Amelia's belly grew rounder, Preston threw himself into a new project. He had been planning to build a larger house for years, and the impending arrival of their baby gave him the impetus to finally begin. He hired a few men from town to help with the heavy work, and slowly, a new structure began to take shape near the original cabin. "It will have 3 bedrooms," Preston explained to Amelia as they walked through the framed-out building one evening. "One for us, one for the baby, and one for guests or future children. A real kitchen with a good stove and plenty of counter space. A sitting room where we can entertain neighbors. It is not fancy, but it will be comfortable and sturdy." "It is perfect," Amelia said, leaning against him as she imagined their life in this new house. "You have given me so much, Preston, more than I ever dreamed of having." "You gave me everything I was missing," Preston replied, kissing the top of her head. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions, working to survive with no real purpose beyond that. Now I have a reason to build for the future, to create something lasting. You and this baby, you are my whole world." In late July, with Amelia now obviously pregnant and the new house nearly complete, they received unwelcome news. Mrs. Hoffman from the general store rode out to the ranch one afternoon, her face troubled. "I thought you should know," she said after accepting Amelia's offer of lemonade. "Henry Barrett has been talking in town. He has been drinking heavily since his brother died, and he has been saying some unkind things about you both. Most people do not pay him any mind, but yesterday he was going on about how you took what should have been his brother's and how he intends to set things right." Preston's expression darkened. "What exactly did he say?" "Nothing specific," Mrs. Hoffman admitted. "But his tone was threatening, and several people heard him. I just thought you should be aware and perhaps be more careful for a while." After Mrs. Hoffman left, Preston insisted on certain precautions. He made sure Amelia was never alone at the ranch, arranging for one of his hired hands to stay close to the house whenever he had to be out on the range. He also started keeping his rifle closer at hand, something that made Amelia nervous even though she understood the necessity. "Do you really think he would try to hurt us?" she asked, one hand protectively covering her swollen belly. "I do not know," Preston admitted, "but I am not taking any chances. You and the baby are too precious to me." The tension lasted for several weeks, But when Henry made no move against them, they began to relax their guard. Perhaps he had just been talking, they reasoned. Perhaps his threats were nothing more than the bitter ramblings of a drunk man looking to blame someone for his brother's death. They were wrong. On a hot August afternoon, with Amelia 8 months pregnant and Preston working on finishing the interior of the new house, Henry Barrett rode onto their property with 2 other men. Preston saw them coming and immediately sent one of his hired hands to fetch Amelia from the garden and get her into the cabin. "Lock the door and do not come out no matter what you hear," the young ranch hand, a boy named Daniel, told her urgently. "Mr. Yates says there might be trouble." Amelia's heart raced with fear, but she did as she was told, barricading herself in the cabin and watching through a crack in the window shutters. She saw Preston walk out to meet the 3 men, his stance confident but wary. "Henry," Preston said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "What brings you out here?" "I have been thinking about your little setup here," Henry said, his words slightly slurred. "You swooped in and took the woman my brother meant to marry, the woman who should have brought his dowry to this family. Then you married her quick and got her with child so there could be no question of sending her back. That does not sit right with me, Yates. That does not sit right at all." "Amelia did not have a dowry," Preston said evenly. "She came here with nothing but a trunk of clothes and the hope of a new life. Your brother made her promises and then died. That is not my fault or hers. My brother would not have wanted her going to another man," Henry insisted, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "She should have honored his memory by going back where she came from, not by whoring herself to the first cowboy who offered her a roof." Preston's hands clenched into fists at the insult, but he kept his voice level. "You need to leave my property, Henry. Now. Before you say something you cannot take back." "Or what?" Henry challenged, dismounting from his horse. The 2 men with him followed suit, and Amelia could see they were spoiling for a fight. "You going to make me leave? You think you are man enough to take on all 3 of us?" Inside the cabin, Amelia felt panic rising in her chest. Preston was outnumbered, and she was helpless to do anything but watch. She looked around desperately for something she could use as a weapon, settling finally on the heavy iron skillet. If they got past Preston, if they tried to break down the door, she would defend herself and her unborn child with everything she had. Outside, the confrontation was escalating. Henry took a swing at Preston, who blocked it and returned with a punch that sent Henry stumbling backward. The other 2 men jumped into the fray, and suddenly it was 3 against 1. Preston held his own remarkably well, his years of hard ranch work making him strong and capable, but the odds were against him. Amelia watched in horror as one of Henry's companions landed a solid blow to Preston's ribs, doubling him over. Henry took advantage of Preston's momentarily lowered guard to punch him in the face, splitting his lip and sending blood flying. Preston went down on one knee, and Amelia knew she could not just stand by any longer. She threw open the cabin door and stepped out onto the porch, the skillet gripped tightly in both hands. "Get off my property," she shouted, her voice ringing with authority despite her fear. "All 3 of you, get off our land right now, or I swear I will shoot you where you stand." The men turned to look at her, and Henry laughed when he saw she was holding a skillet instead of a gun. "Going to fry us to death, are you?" "No," said a new voice, "but I might shoot you if you do not do what the lady says." Everyone turned to see Daniel, the ranch hand, standing at the corner of the barn, Preston's rifle aimed steadily at Henry Barrett. Behind him were the 2 other ranch hands Preston employed, both armed and looking serious. "This is not your fight, boy," Henry said, but some of the bravado had gone out of his voice. "Any fight that involves Mr. and Mrs. Yates is our fight," Daniel said firmly. They are good people who treat us fair and pay us honest wages. We are not about to stand by and watch you hurt them. Now you have two choices. You can ride out of here peacefully, or we can take this to the sheriff and let him sort it out. But either way, you are not hurting anyone else today." Henry looked at the three armed ranch hands, at Preston struggling to his feet with blood running down his chin, at Amelia standing on the porch with her protective hand over her pregnant belly, and something in him seemed to deflate. Whatever fight had driven him here, whatever grievance he thought he was avenging, it was not worth dying over. "This is not finished," he muttered, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Yes, it is," Preston said, his voice hard despite his split lip. "It is finished, Henry. Your brother is dead, and nothing you do to me or Amelia will bring him back. Thomas made his choices, and we have made ours. Leave us in peace to live our lives, and we will do the same for you." Henry mounted his horse, his two companions following suit. "You have not heard the last of this," he threatened, but there was no real conviction in his voice. "If we do hear from you again," Preston said quietly, "it will be through the sheriff. I am filing a complaint about this, Henry. You trespassed on my property, threatened my wife, and assaulted me. The next time you come near my family, you will be arrested. That is a promise." The three men rode off, and only then did Amelia allow herself to sag against the porch railing, her legs suddenly weak with relief. Preston limped over to her, waving off the concerned ranch hands, and pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands running over her as if to reassure himself that she was unharmed. "Did he touch you? Did any of them get close to you?" "I am fine," Amelia assured him, though she was shaking. "But you are not. Come inside and let me clean those cuts." She tended to Preston's injuries with gentle hands, cleaning the split lip and the cut above his eyebrow, checking his ribs for breaks. He was bruised and battered, but nothing seemed to be seriously damaged. As she worked, she found herself crying, the fear and stress of the confrontation finally catching up with her. "I thought they were going to kill you," she sobbed. "I thought they would hurt you and then come after me and the baby, and I did not know what to do." Preston pulled her carefully into his lap, mindful of her pregnant belly, and held her while she cried. "I am all right," he murmured. "We are all right. And thanks to Daniel and the boys, Henry knows he cannot just ride in here and threaten us. I do not think he will be back." True to his word, Preston rode into town the next day and filed a formal complaint with the sheriff. The sheriff, a no-nonsense man named William Briggs, took the complaint seriously and paid Henry Barrett a visit. Whatever was said during that conversation, it had the desired effect. Henry left town 2 weeks later, reportedly heading to California to seek his fortune in the gold fields. They never saw him again. As August turned to September, Amelia's pregnancy entered its final weeks. She was huge and uncomfortable, waddling more than walking, and unable to do many of the tasks she had been handling around the ranch. Preston doted on her constantly, making sure she had everything she needed and refusing to let her overexert herself. "I feel useless," Amelia complained one afternoon as she watched Preston hang laundry that she should have been able to handle herself. "You are growing our child," Preston reminded her, coming over to kiss her forehead. "That is the most important job in the world right now. Everything else can wait." The new house was finally completed in mid-September, and they spent a week moving their belongings from the cabin to the larger, more comfortable structure. Amelia loved the new house, with its bright windows, spacious rooms, and the beautiful wooden cradle Preston had built and placed in the corner of the nursery. "It is perfect," she said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the cradle. "Our baby is so lucky to have a father like you." "I am the lucky one," Preston insisted, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her swollen belly. "I have you, and soon I will have our child. I never thought I would be this happy." Amelia went into labor on a warm September evening, 3 days after they had finished moving into the new house. Preston sent Daniel racing to town to fetch Mrs. Winters, who had agreed to help with the delivery, and then focused all his attention on Amelia. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Preston stayed by Amelia's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, and offering encouragement when she was sure she could not push any more. Mrs. Winters was calm and capable, guiding Amelia through each contraction and assuring her that everything was progressing normally. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith on the 2nd day of September 1883, Amelia gave one final push, and their baby entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. Mrs. Winters caught the infant expertly and announced with a broad smile, "It is a boy. You have a fine, healthy son." Preston laughed and cried at the same time, kissing Amelia's sweaty face and telling her how amazing she was, how proud he was of her. Amelia was exhausted but filled with overwhelming love as Mrs. Winters placed the cleaned and swaddled baby in her arms. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair, tiny fingers that gripped hers instinctively, and eyes that would later turn out to be the same hazel color as his father's. "Hello, little one," Amelia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have been waiting so long to meet you." Preston sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both of them, staring in wonder at his son. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names during Amelia's pregnancy, but had not been able to agree on any particular choice. Now, looking at their son, Amelia felt suddenly certain. "Patrick," she said. "After my father, Patrick Yates." "Patrick Yates," Preston repeated, testing the name. "I love it." Welcome to the world, Patrick. The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, but also filled with more joy than either Preston or Amelia had thought possible. Patrick was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, though he had a powerful set of lungs when he decided he wanted something. Amelia recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to handling most of her household tasks, though Preston insisted on hiring a local girl to come help a few days a week so Amelia could rest. Mrs. Winters visited frequently, bringing food and offering advice, and other neighbor ladies also stopped by to meet the new baby and welcome Amelia more fully into the community. She found herself building friendships with these ranch women, who understood the challenges and rewards of this life in a way her Philadelphia friends never could have. As fall turned to winter, Preston hired more help to expand the ranch operation. With Amelia and baby Patrick to provide for, he was more motivated than ever to make the ranch successful. He bought more cattle, invested in better breeding stock, and began building a reputation for quality beef that fetched good prices at market. Money was still tight, but they were making progress, and the future looked brighter than it ever had. On Christmas morning, their first as a family of 3, Preston gave Amelia a beautiful shawl he had special ordered from back east, and Amelia gave him a new saddle she had been saving for secretly. They opened their gifts by the fireplace in their new home while Patrick napped in his cradle, and Amelia reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 year. "A year ago, I was crying in the snow, thinking my life was over," she told Preston. "And now look at us. We have this beautiful home, a healthy baby, a successful ranch and each other. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Preston said, pulling her close. "The day you showed up on my property was the luckiest day of my life, even if neither of us knew it then." The years passed, bringing both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, and Preston's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman spread throughout Nevada. 2 years after Patrick was born, Amelia delivered a healthy baby girl they named Alina, who had her mother's dark hair and a stubborn streak that made both parents laugh. 3 years after that came another boy, Michael, who was quieter than his siblings but just as beloved. Through it all, Preston and Amelia's love for each other only deepened. They faced droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and market fluctuations, the everyday challenges of raising children and running a ranch. But they faced it all together, partners in every sense of the word, and their love remained the foundation on which everything else was built. Amelia often thought about that night in the snow, about how close she had come to giving up entirely. If Preston had not found her, if he had not offered her shelter and kindness and eventually his heart, her life would have turned out so differently. She shuddered to think of what might have happened to her, alone and desperate in that storm, but Preston had found her. He had carried her home through the snow, had told her no more tears, only joy, and had meant it with every fiber of his being. He had given her not just a roof over her head or a job to do, but a real home, a true partnership, and a love that sustained her through every difficulty. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Amelia up to a ridge overlooking their ranch. The cattle dotted the valley below. The house stood solid and welcoming with smoke curling from its chimney, and somewhere down there, their 3 children were playing under the watchful eye of the hired hand's wife, who had agreed to watch them for the afternoon. "Look at what we have built," Preston said, his arm around Amelia's waist. 10 years ago, this was just a dream. Now it is real, solid, lasting, and it is all because of you. Because of us, Amelia corrected, leaning into him. "We built this together, Preston. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. And everything good in mine started the day you showed up crying in the snow," Preston replied. "I meant what I said that night, you know. No more tears, only joy, and we have had so much joy, have we not?" "More than I ever imagined possible," Amelia agreed. "More than I deserve." "You deserve everything good in this world," Preston said seriously, turning to face her. "You are the strongest, bravest, most loving woman I have ever known. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful. You made a home out of a bachelor's cabin, turned a lonely cowboy into a husband and father, and brought more light and love into my life than I thought possible. I love you, Amelia Yates, more today than I did 10 years ago, and I will love you more with each passing year." Amelia felt tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life." They stood together on that ridge as the sun began to set, painting the Nevada sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Below them, their children's laughter drifted up on the breeze, mixing with the lowing of cattle and the sounds of ranch life continuing in its steady rhythm. It was not the life Amelia had planned when she left Philadelphia. It was not what she had imagined when she answered that advertisement for a mail-order bride. It was so much better. As they walked back down to the house hand in hand, Amelia thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The pain of losing her parents, the desperation that had driven her west, the crushing disappointment of Thomas Barrett's death, the terrifying night in the snow. Every hardship had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this profound happiness. She thought about Henry Barrett, too, and wondered if he ever found what he was looking for in California. She hoped he had found some measure of peace, some way to let go of his anger and bitterness. She bore him no ill will now, all these years later. If anything, she was grateful in a strange way that his brother had died, because if Thomas had lived, she would have married him out of desperation and necessity, and she never would have known Preston. She never would have experienced this deep, abiding love that grew stronger with every passing year. The children ran to greet them as they approached the house. Patrick tall and lanky at 11, Alina chattering excitedly about something she had discovered in the barn, Michael clinging shyly to his father's leg. Preston scooped Michael up with one arm while ruffling Patrick's hair, and Amelia took Alina's hand, listening to her daughter's excited story as they all went inside together. This was what she had been searching for all along, Amelia realized. Not a grand mansion or fancy clothes or social status. Just this, a warm house full of love, children who felt safe and cherished, a husband who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, and the solid satisfaction of a life built on honest work and mutual respect. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Preston and Amelia sat together by the fire in their sitting room. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together at the end of each day when they could talk about their hopes and worries, their plans for the future, or simply sit in comfortable silence. You ever think about what your life would have been like if Thomas had lived? Preston asked, the question surprising both of them with its boldness. Amelia considered carefully before answering. Sometimes, she admitted. I think about it and I feel guilty for being glad things turned out the way they did, but the truth is, I do not think I would have been happy with Thomas. I would have been grateful for security and a home, but I would not have known what I was missing. I would not have known that marriage could be a true partnership, that a husband could be a best friend as well as a lover, that love could grow and deepen over time instead of just fading into comfortable routine. I think about the same thing, Preston confessed. About what my life would have been like if I had not decided to check the property line that night, if I had not seen you collapse in the snow. I would have just kept working the ranch alone, getting older and more set in my ways, probably never marrying because I could not imagine finding someone who would want this hard life. I would have missed out on everything that matters. You, our children, this feeling that my life means something beyond just surviving from one day to the next. We saved each other, Amelia said softly. You think you saved me that night, but the truth is, I saved you right back. We were both lost in our own ways, and we found each other exactly when we needed to. Preston pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. No more tears, only joy, he murmured, repeating the words that had become their private motto over the years. Only joy, Amelia agreed, and she meant it with all her heart. As the years continued to pass, the Yates Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. Preston's hard work and fair dealing earned him respect throughout Nevada, and he was often called upon to serve on cattlemen's associations and community boards. Amelia became known for her hospitality and her involvement in the small school that had been built in Silver Peak, serving on its board and organizing fundraisers to buy books and supplies. Their children grew strong and capable, learning to work the ranch alongside their father and receiving their education from their mother and the dedicated teacher at the Silver Peak School. Patrick showed a natural talent for working with horses and began training them for sale, adding a new income stream to the ranch. Alina was fearless and determined, often insisting on doing the same work as her brothers despite being smaller and younger. Michael was quieter but had a gift for numbers and helped his father manage the ranch's finances and business dealings. By the time Preston and Amelia celebrated their 20th anniversary, they had 6 children in total, ranging in age from 20-year-old Patrick down to 5-year-old twins, a boy and girl named William and Sarah. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch now covered thousands of acres and supported hundreds of head of cattle. But despite all the material success, what mattered most to both Preston and Amelia was the family they had built together. They had created a home filled with love and laughter, where children felt safe to be themselves, where hard work was valued but so were kindness and compassion, where mistakes were opportunities to learn rather than reasons for shame. On Amelia's 45th birthday, Preston surprised her with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time they had left the ranch for more than a day trip in years, and Amelia was nervous about being away from the children and the familiar routines of ranch life. But Preston insisted, arranging for Patrick and his new wife to oversee things while they were gone, and Amelia found herself on a train heading west with nothing to do but relax and enjoy her husband's company. San Francisco amazed and overwhelmed her with its size and bustle, so different from the wide, open spaces of Nevada she had come to love. But Preston had planned everything carefully, booking them a room in a nice hotel and taking her to restaurants and theaters and even to the ocean, which Amelia had never seen before. Standing on the beach watching the waves roll in, Amelia felt Preston's arms come around her from behind. "Happy birthday," he murmured in her ear. "Are you glad we came?" "I am glad I am here with you," Amelia replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "But I will be glad to go home too. I never thought I would say this, but I miss Nevada. I miss our ranch and our children and our life there." "When did I become such a country woman?" Preston laughed. "The same day you stopped being a city girl from Philadelphia and became my wife. You took to ranch life like you were born to it." "Because I had a good teacher," Amelia said, turning in his arms to face him. "And because I had a reason to make it work. You were always my reason, Preston. You and our family." They stayed in San Francisco for a week, enjoying the city's pleasures but also counting the days until they could return home. When their train finally pulled into the Silver Peak station and they saw their children waiting on the platform to greet them, Amelia felt a surge of love and contentment so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "No more tears," Preston reminded her gently, but he was smiling because he understood. These were not tears of sorrow or pain, but of overwhelming gratitude and joy. "Only joy," Amelia agreed, and she went to embrace her children, her heart full to bursting. As Amelia and Preston entered their later years, they began to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Patrick and his brothers to take on more responsibility. Preston was in his 60s now, his hair gone silver and his body bearing the accumulated aches and pains of decades of hard physical labor. Amelia was still active and energetic, but she too felt the years catching up with her. They spent more time with their grandchildren, who were beginning to arrive with delightful regularity. Patrick and his wife had 3 children, Eleanor and her husband had 2, and Michael was courting a sweet young woman from town who everyone expected would become his wife before long. The house that had once seemed so spacious now bulged with family on Sundays and holidays, filled with the chaos and joy of multiple generations gathered together. One winter evening, as they sat together by the fire as they had done countless times over their 40 years of marriage, Preston took Amelia's hand and looked at her with the same love and wonder he had shown since the beginning. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, "about that night I found you in the snow, about how one small decision, one moment of paying attention to what was happening around me instead of just going about my business, changed everything." "I think about it too," Amelia admitted. "I think about how close I came to giving up entirely, and how lucky I am that you were exactly where you needed to be at exactly the right moment." "You believe in fate?" Preston asked. "Do you think we were meant to find each other?" Amelia considered the question seriously. "I think we were two people who needed each other, and somehow the universe conspired to put us in the same place at the same time. Whether you call that fate or luck or divine intervention does not really matter. What matters is that we did find each other, and we built something beautiful together." Preston nodded, satisfied with her answer. "I want you to know," he said, "that every single day of these past 40 years has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days when nothing went right and we were exhausted and worried about money or the children or the ranch. Even those days were gifts because I got to face them with you by my side." Amelia felt tears threatening, but they were the kind that came from a heart so full of love it could barely contain it all. "You gave me a life I never could have imagined," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You took a terrified, desperate woman and showed her what real love looks like. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and the greatest happiness I have ever known. I love you, Preston Yates, more than words can ever express." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, holding hands as they had done for 4 decades. Outside, the Nevada wind howled across the high desert, carrying with it the promise of snow. But inside, in this house they had built together, filled with the memories of a lifetime and the love of a large and boisterous family, there was only warmth and contentment and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, leaving Amelia heartbroken, but also profoundly grateful for the 45 years they had shared. Their children and grandchildren rallied around her, making sure she was never alone, bringing her meals and company and gentle comfort in her grief. At the funeral, Amelia stood at the graveside and looked out at the gathered crowd. All 6 of their children were there with their families, along with hired hands past and present, neighbors from ranches all over the region, townspeople from Silver Peak, and even some of Preston's business associates from as far away as Reno. It was a testament to the man Preston had been, the lives he had touched, the respect and love he had earned through his honest dealings and kind heart. As they lowered his casket into the ground, Amelia remembered that night in the snow, remembered the way Preston had appeared like an angel of mercy when she was at her lowest point. She remembered his words, "No more tears, only joy." It seemed impossible to follow that advice now, with her heart breaking at his loss, but she knew he would want her to try. In the years that followed, Amelia lived on at the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She remained active and involved, still running her household and helping with the younger grandchildren, still attending church and community events in Silver Peak. She often walked up to the ridge where she and Preston had stood on their 10th anniversary, looking out over the ranch they had built together, and she would talk to him as if he were standing beside her. She told him about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about the success of the ranch under Patrick's management, about the small triumphs and challenges of everyday life. And always, she thanked him for that night in the snow, for the kindness that had saved her life and changed everything that came after. Amelia lived to be 87 years old, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. When her time came to leave this world, she went peacefully, with a smile on her face and no regrets in her heart. In her final moments, she could have sworn she felt Preston's hand take hers, heard his voice say one last time, "No more tears, only joy." At her funeral, her eldest son Patrick stood to speak, his own hair now silver, his own grandchildren clustered around him. He told the story his mother had shared many times over the years, about a desperate night in a snowstorm and a cowboy who had shown unexpected kindness to a stranger. He talked about the love his parents had shared, the family they had built, the legacy they had left not just in land and cattle, but in the values they had passed down through generations. My mother used to say that the worst night of her life turned into the best thing that ever happened to her, Patrick said, his voice carrying across the gathered mourners. She said that sometimes blessings come disguised as disasters, and the key to a happy life is being open to possibilities even in your darkest moments. She and my father built something that will last long after all of us are gone, not because of the ranch or the money, but because of the love they shared and the example they set. They showed us all what marriage should be, what family means, and how to face life's challenges with courage and grace. After the service, the family gathered at the ranch house, now run by Patrick's eldest son, but still very much the home Amelia and Preston had built together all those decades ago. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told stories, shared memories, and celebrated a life well lived and a love that had endured beyond death. In the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side. Preston Yates and Amelia Zimmerman Yates, their names carved in granite, their dates marking out the span of their time on Earth. But more than that, the stones represented a love story that had begun in snow and tears and had transformed into decades of joy. The mail-order bride who had shown up crying in the snow had found so much more than she had ever hoped for. And the cowboy who had told her, "No more tears, only joy," had kept that promise through all the years they had been given, building with her a life that surpassed both their dreams. Their story became legend in Silver Peak, told and retold over the years, adapted and embellished perhaps, but always true in its essential message. That kindness matters, that love can be found in unexpected places, that the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that a promise made in good faith and kept through all the years is the most valuable thing any person can give or receive. The ranch continued to prosper under the management of their descendants, who worked hard to honor the legacy of Preston and Amelia Yates. And sometimes, on winter nights when snow fell on the Nevada desert, people swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the property, checking on the cattle and the land they had loved, still together as they had promised to be, still finding joy in each other's company, even beyond the boundaries of mortal life. It was a fitting end to a love story that had started with tears in the snow and had blossomed into a lifetime of joy, partnership, and enduring devotion. Preston and Amelia had found each other when both were lost, had built something lasting and beautiful together, and had left behind a legacy that would continue for generations. No more tears, only joy. That had been Preston's promise on the night they met, and it had become the foundation of their life together. Through good times and bad, through challenges and triumphs, through the raising of children and the building of an empire, that simple phrase had guided them. And in the end, looking back across all the years, both of them would have said without hesitation that it had been true. The tears of that first night had given way to decades of joy, and that joy had been more than worth every hardship they had faced to achieve it. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love proven to be the strongest force in both their lives. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Preston and Amelia Yates were together still, having earned their happily ever after through decades of choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until death parted them and then brought them back together again in whatever lies beyond. The end of their story was not sad but triumphant, not a closing but a completion, not an ending but a transformation into something eternal. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure as long as there were people who believed in the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the transformative magic of true love. And every winter, when the first snow fell on Silver Peak, Nevada, people remembered the story of the mail-order bride who had shown up crying in the snow and the cowboy who had promised her joy. And they smiled, knowing that some love stories really do have perfect endings.